Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Software Development and Architecture Podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. We have Prasanna Veeraswamy. Uh, Prasanna is unique in many ways, and we'll get to know as we get into the conversation. But let me give you a brief introduction. Prasanna is an American citizen of Indian origin who grew up in the sunny southern Indian metropolis of Chennai before moving to the States in late 1998. Though Prasanna followed the stereotypical career path that most techies from the subcontinent do after migrating abroad, his tack took some unique twists. Prasanna was rewarded with opportunities to work and live in some of the most exciting places across the globe, including America, China, India, Germany, Denmark, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Taiwan, and Denmark. I think I said that twice. My apologies. Prasanna likes to consider himself a serial traveler who's addicted to exploring new destinations and considers hopping on a plane, train, bus, or boat to embark on a new journey as the best rehab for this quote unquote disorder. And this incurable condition, quote unquote, has taken Prasanna to more than 200 countries in 800 plus cities. Just let me restate that one more time: 200 countries in 800 plus cities across a small planet, as Prasanna calls it, that we call home. Apart from traveling, Prasanna loves to play the guitar, trekking, cooking, experimental dishes, and composing music. Prasanna is also a huge fan of anything made with the finest hops, malt, and yeast, and goes on craft beer hunting trips, both in the travel destinations and locally. Prasanna, thank you so much. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Same here. Super excited, Chris, and thanks for inviting me to the podcast. Yeah, looking forward.
I can't wait to get started because, you know, let's start with the most obvious here, right? I'm going to share my screen so you can check out Prasanna's book. I took the liberty of grabbing the screenshot of the book from Amazon.com. So let me share the screen here. Okay, tell me, do you see my screen, right, Prasanna?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
So, folks, this is Prasanna's book, One for the Road. You can find that on Amazon. I took the screenshot, from Amazon as well. The book is a very interesting book. We're going to talk about a number of things, but also things parallel to some of what you've stated in the book, just curiosity questions that not only I have, but I'm pretty sure folks are going to watch this are going to have those same questions as well. So I'm going to do a screen share back and forth because we're going to touch upon a number of different items. But let me go back and stop the share here for a second. So Prasanna, I just looked up before I started the recording, right? I think the world population is about 8 billion, I would say, give or take, 8 billion
Yes,
people,
almost. It's getting there. Yes, yeah.
right? I thought we got there, but maybe we're there. So, but basically, and I think I was looking to see the number of people who've traveled to every single country in the world, right? Someone like you, it takes a moment to digest. I know I read out the introduction, but for folks, let me state it one more time. I'm going to ask a question to people who are watching this. How many people do you personally know who've been to every country in the world, right? That's a difficult question, probably an easy question, actually, because the answer might be no for a lot of us. Not for me, for a lot of you also. I know, Prasanna. But let's say, even if I made the question simpler and said, how many of us know people who've been to, like, I don't know, 100 countries or a 50 countries? I did a count, actually, a few minutes ago before I came to this recording. It was abysmal, the number. So I'm not even going to state what that number is. But so 8 billion people. I think the number is around 250. I don't know how accurate the number is. So am I accurate in starting this conversation, Prasanna, saying you might literally be one of 250 people in this world that has about 8 billion people?
I'll put the number a little bit higher. The number of people who travel to every country. There are different groups out there, like communities, which is like most travel people or like a nomad list and things like that, right? So there are people who travel to all the countries. I would put it somewhere 400 to 500 people, right? And again, it's questionable what every country means. Yeah, so your number is almost up there, like out of 8 billions, just a few hundreds. Yeah, that's where I would put it. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say even let's be magnanimous. I'm going to double the number and say 500 people. And if I divide 500 by my calculator, 80,000, 800,000, 8 million, 80 million, 800 million, and 8 billion, I don't know if it's even going to So it's 0.0000625% of the world, right? Just to
That's
give context to it. In one of the few places I've been to, as somebody who's on the other end of the travel spectrum, when I was in Hawaii, I think we took the submarine or one of those things one time, and we went down like 100 foot below sea level. And I think the guide called out for what percentage of the people had actually gone down to that level. I don't remember that number, but I reckon that was actually more people than this 0.0000625%. So it puts you in a very unique position, right? Very unique position.
Mhm.
It's going to take a while to digest it. So I recommend to folks to purchase the book, read your stories for themselves. But for what would you tell? I'm sure you've been asked this question, so I'm sorry if I'm asking this again. What does it mean in your mind? You've done that. It's an incredible feat. Can you tell us what you feel having been able to do that?
Yeah, it is. It's a feeling that I cannot explain, right? I think that's what I written in the book. My favorite quote is it's like, if you, the world is like a book, right? And if you not travel, you just read one page. I mean, it's a cliched quote, but actually, yeah, I think more than the experiences and what I've acquired through travel, I think it's the education, which I believe is the biggest, personal as well as for my profession. uh, I keep learning every day. Even from the last trip that I came back from Europe, there is so many learnings that I would like to, take with me in my journey forward. So I think I had experience. If you ask me and I'm not stopped yet. So the world is still,
Never, never, absolutely
yeah,
not.
so much more to see. The best way to explain is, yeah, travel is the best way of educating yourself. Yeah, you can go to any university, any kind of school, any kind of classes, but nothing teaches you like what travel does, whether it's personal or professional. So that's how I would put my experiences, if you ask.
It's very humble. Not everybody is humble. If I travel to 20 countries, I'm going to take 1,000, I don't know, 10,000 photos. I mean, I know, people go to Florida and take, 1,000 photos of the dolphin. And then when you visit them, I'm going to get into a lot of those types of discussions, but let me step back.
Hey,
You summarized it in a very humble manner. A lot of us wouldn't do it that way. I wouldn't do it that way because it's, again, I want to just the magnitude of this, the reason I want to start this podcast and the conversation by calling out for that percentage. It means it's an incredible number. So before I we move forward with the conversation, I just want to say it's amazing personally, even to know somebody from back in college. I wish I'd known, I hope we get to know each other a lot more. But even otherwise, as somebody who I know, I've been to your room, like I mentioned offline before the
mhm.
call, back in college, and then I think to myself, this is amazing, right? I know I'm repeating it, but just I want to express my feeling, and I'm quite sure it's the same for a lot of the people who are watching this, because a lot of the audience is developers like myself. That doesn't mean anything in the context of this conversation, but I'm just saying that not all of us get to travel anywhere near, right?
Yeah.
Anywhere near the breadth of what you've done here.
Yeah, but I think yeah, thank you. I mean, thank you for. I'm not that humble all the time, but I think, yeah, it's. I think what I would like to be very proud of, right? It's like for this community of your listeners. It's. I'm not putting down the other kind of travelers, because a lot of people who claim they are digital nomads, all these articles like how I quit my job and travel around the world and make it for a living, right? So, my wife and I, she used to be in Amazon, so we both are, in the tech industry. But what we are proud of as a couple is we did this while holding a steady job and while working for uh, corporations which are pretty big, like Microsoft types, right? So, and not actually compromising on the career, and we still managed to do this. So that's what we as a couple are very proud of, and that's one big message I want to give it to your listeners, that it's not this or that. You can enjoy, exploring the world, as well as do what you're doing professionally. Both can be balanced, and I think that I'm not sure of anybody who's done this the way we have done it. I mean, they've quit and gone and seen the world, but we managed to do this while holding a steady job, which was something I feel very proud of personally.
And it's very understandable, right? I'm going to give it a term. In a lot of the conversations, I used to do predominantly solo technical podcasts till somebody told me a month ago, Chris, you should probably invite other people. It's going to be a whole lot more fun. And it's incredible fun that I almost don't even want to go back to doing the solo podcast, which I still do, right? But there's been a lot of learnings, and people, we've talked a variety of different topics, right? Here we're going to talk technology, but in the context of travel. And just so for folks, the when I invited Prasanna for the podcast, we explored a few topics, and the topic we'd actually picked for this conversation, I'm not going to promise that we can get to it in this conversation, in all honesty, just because of my excitement of actually talking to somebody who's done all these travels. But the topic, for what it's worth, we will get to. And like I've told my other guest, Prasanna, my hope as somebody who is not a professional podcaster, but is just starting to do this for a variety of other reasons, is to do a job that's not so sloppy that people actually find value in coming back. That's my bar is pretty low for myself. I want to make sure I do a decent enough job, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed here as well. The topic that we had picked was learnings from global travels about gaps in app localizations. I mean, I think that's a phenomenal topic in itself, which we'll certainly go into. I'm just not exactly sure when in this conversation or the subsequent ones, right? Just so for folks, that is the topic that I originally Press and I decided to have a conversation about. One more time, the title is learnings from global travels about gaps in app localizations and localizations of apps, and we'll get to it slowly but surely. Now, I think that's a good place to start. I'm going to start. I'm going to share my screen here, right? And bear with me while I do this back and forth here. So I'm going to share my screen, and every time I do that, I'm going to ask the question if you can actually see it. You can see it, right, Prasanna?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay, I was just doing the simple math. Folks have been to every country. My number is like 250. You said about 400, right? That's just so folks get the context, give or take. Okay, now I want to go here. I drew this thing up just to, I don't prepare at all for my podcast. For this one, I just drew this up to kind of gear me towards asking certain questions that I would otherwise forget, but this is still unprepared. I just spent a few minutes before the call. I promise you, like 10 minutes to draw this thing up. Uh, Before we get to the topics, right, President, one of the things is to know a person, right? Again, folks should buy the book to know a whole lot more about you as a person, as a traveler. But I wrote a few things up here that typically defines a lot of us, right? A lot of us. In other words, I'm going to go through that list and we can talk about each of these items. And again, feel free to go into the levels of details you want to go into and not the levels of details that you don't want to go into. And if I ask something that's more personal than I intend for it to be, my apologies. Please ignore those questions. Yeah.
Okay.
So, what typically defines us? I've just took myself as a person here, right? And I attach this to Prasanna V. Uh, Upbringing, right? Our family and friends. I'm going to run through this and we can talk about items that you want to focus more on.
Mhm.
What defines us? Okay, family, friends, there could be others, but that's basically it from an upbringing standpoint. And you mentioned that you grew up oops, let me come back here. You mentioned you grew up in Chennai. I was born and raised in Chennai as well. And coincidentally, the previous guest, Deva, was a professor of sales in France. He grew up in Chennai, so it's a lot of people from my town, which is awesome. Actually, it's not it doesn't happen all the time. And then education, school, early schooling years, middle school, primary, high school, and then college. That defines, plays a lot of, it shapes us as individuals. Experience, our work, when we work for other people, our work for ourselves, becoming entrepreneurs, right? That's, I just put them in simple two categories. There's a lot more to it. And then the travel, I also have a small square here that says extensive travel, because travel is a word that we could use, obviously, but in your case, when you're 0.0000625, I missed a zero there, percent of the world, I think I think you command the respect to call it extensive travel, not just travel. And I put together a bunch of continents here. So a lot of this, I think, shapes a person. I mean, before I ask you the more specific questions, President, I mean, would you agree that this is a layman's way of laying things out?
Yeah, definitely. And the only thing I would add to that is I believe it's a evolution, right? So all these shape because what a person is, like for example, my case, what I was before going into BITS Pilani was the university, then getting out of it was the two different versions. Then getting into US and then getting out of US. Like every phase in your life, you keep evolving. Yeah, and
Right?
you're right. The parameters that you called out are exactly what shapes. and hopefully it should keep making people evolve as they go through these different things, right? Phases in their life. Yeah, but
Oh,
what you called out is perfect. Yeah.
okay, so let's say for a lot of us, I'm going to, the thing is, if I share the tool doesn't show me, I'm not able to see you if I share it. So I'm going to
Okay.
stop share just so I can see you here.
Yeah.
So of those categories, upbringing, education, and experience is common to a lot of us in the world, right? I mean, a lot of us have our early years. We have family and friends we grow up with. We go to school, then we go to college. A lot of us are, at least if you're privileged to be able to do these things, and then you have your work experience. Uh, I had to travel as a unique circle here, just in the context of you and our conversation. But if I were to ask you, amongst these circles, and this is a time I probably should share again,
No,
or
you
these
don't need.
shapes, right? What do you think has shaped you at this point of time in your life? What would I know? It's evolution as well. Things change. But if I asked you today, if you had to pick one of those boxes or circles, which one would you pick as the first item to talk about?
I would certainly. I wouldn't. I don't know how to phrase this. It's not travel. The fact that I've lived in different countries is would be the biggest factor, right? Because let me explain what I'm saying here. Because education and everything, like you said, most of us follow the same arc, right? And the minute you land in US, most of the people I know, I'm not saying what they're doing is right or wrong, but they moved to Seattle and they've been in Seattle for 25 years. So what they know is the work, life, and culture of how people work, the techies work there and everything, right? So they've never gone to the next stage. And I was lucky enough to having, after being in Seattle for close to 12 years, then having, when I say travel, having moved and lived in 7, 8 different countries, I think that has been the biggest impact. Coming into China and living there and seeing the vibrant, the markets of Asia and everything, I never wanted to go back. And then it is only a path forward, right? So the biggest impact I would say was the travel that was part of my lifestyle. It's not just the trips you take, right?
You know
That's
what? I think it's you said it beautifully, and I think I it resonates a lot with me because as somebody who's done a little bit of travel, again, I almost fear to use the word travel in the context of someone like you in the room, but I'm still going to say it. It's still travel. The little bit of travel that I've done, we go to a place. We're a family of three, and we don't go to a lot of the touristy spots. We're just not used to a lot of people, over the years. Uh, so that's one thing that's maybe a little bit different from a lot of the people who would travel to different locations, right? And the second thing is, we let's say we go to a city in Europe, for instance, right? A country. If we're spending 10 or 12 days, which is a really small number, like a couple of weeks, but we don't end up going to more than one country, and we don't end up going to even more than one city for that matter, right? Because we
Mhm.
want to take in what we can in the 2 weeks we are living in that particular town, right? And a couple of
Mhm.
towns, for instance. And I say this as a response to what you're stating there, and tell me if it makes sense. Because if we had 2 weeks and we traveled all of UK, right, from all southern part of UK to all the way up to Scotland, you will still, meet people, understand some culture. But 2 weeks for the country, even UK is not nearly as big as the US, for instance, right,
Mhm.
or China, but it's still inadequate. So personally, as a family, our travel style has been go to a place, just sit there. I mean, for a couple of weeks, do not a whole lot, take it in, and then we feel like we understood the place a little bit more. So when you mention living in a place, it's amazing because we've not made that happen yet. But I always thought about, hey, I want to go to England because I love cricket. I want to after tea time, I believe watching cricket in England is like free. I didn't even know that. So
Mhm.
I think about living in, say, somewhere in England, in UK, watching cricket after tea time every day for the rest of my life, between 3 o'clock and 5 or 4 to 6 or something like that, right? What
Yeah.
you will learn from that experience of living there, you mentioned, is different from traveling. So let me ask a question. If you had done everything that you've done, but you never lived in any of these places, let's say your base was India or base was the US, and then you did a lot of these travels, would that have been remarkably different? A little bit different? I'm asking you like these psychology questions where you have to pick one of these five things, but
Yeah.
how
No,
how different do you think it would have been?
It would have been definitely different, right? I think you still learn a lot just by travels, right? Because you're going to, I mean, I learned most about my own home country of birth, right? India, only after I left India. I left the shore, went and traveled and saw, wow, like what all India has to offer. I didn't realize when I was living. So travel without even living, just traveling around teaches you a lot. But having, like you said, even if it's 2 weeks or 1 month, right, a short-term project also, if you're gone and stayed somewhere, that makes a big difference. My first exposure to China was like a Microsoft project. It was like sent for 4 months. This was in Beijing, and it was fascinating. Like, in fact, my friends asked me, "Hey, why are you leaving Microsoft in Seattle? Why are they sending you to China? Are you, in fact, this was a real question. Are you getting demoted? Are they actually pushing? Is it safe? Isn't it dangerous? Isn't it a communist country and everything, right?" Until I landed there, it was an eye-opening experience. It was only 4 months, like I said, I didn't live for long, but what I picked up from there, how the people work and how the technology works and everything, it was a shocker. So coming back to Seattle after that, I was a different person, right? The same team, when I came back and embedded, I was thinking differently than all my colleagues who were thinking exactly the same way. They're not even thinking America; they were thinking West Coast, right? Which is a very different thinking. So I would definitely say, yeah, traveling helps, but living in a place, even if it's for short term, makes a huge, huge difference.
Okay, so let's say I'm going to ask you a bunch of random questions, and then
Go
we'll
ahead.
eventually get into, the core of what I also want to understand and ask here, because this is inspiring to a lot of us, right? It's absolutely inspiring because we do technology all day long. You're in that business as well, so we'll get to all of those. And one of what you mentioned earlier, that what you believe you're proud of is that you're able to do it not by quitting something else and just making a dramatic shift, but doing alongside. I was going to put a term to it. I sometimes it might sound contrived because this is an engineering podcast where you're having sometimes non-engineering discussions. But I'll be honest with you, it's not contrived. It's not manufactured examples. It's just natural because my only awareness and knowledge is in the space of engineering. I'm going to call it scalability. I'm going to call it scalability because if you had to quit your job, quit everything else and travel, unless you're a multi-million, which you might be. I'm just saying, unless we are multi-millionaires, we may not be able to afford that, right? So scalability is a key aspect and component of software and in
Mhm.
life as well. So whatever you
Yes.
mentioned earlier, I'm going to call it scalability and come back to it at a slightly later
Yeah.
point of time. You took China as an example, beautiful example, wonderful country, great people. Now, let's say you work with a lot of folks in China remotely sitting in Seattle. Let's say you work for a company. Let's take Alibaba or TikTok or one of the companies headquartered. I know TikTok is headquartered in like Singapore,
Mhm.
but just taking an example.
Mhm.
And let's say you had the opportunity to work with folks who are located in like Shanghai and Beijing, and you've done work for a long time. Let's say you spent 12 months. I'm going to give you random manufactured
Mhm.
examples. You worked with a team that's based out of Beijing. You had interactions, you have these scrum calls, you get on these meetings, you know people, you have a co-working environment. You're doing it remotely. Now you go to China for like 4 months. uh, can you explain? I don't want to make these leading questions. I don't intend for them to be leading questions, but I want to play the devil's advocate because sometimes it's not clear in our minds. There's video, there's technology, there's voice, there's visuals, there's everything, there's 4K, 8K, and 16K, whatever, whatnot, right? What is the difference? I mean, can I not understand and appreciate every single thing about Beijing, sitting in Seattle, working with a team in China?
Yeah, good, very good question, very tricky question, right? So I'll give an example. This was the case, right? Because you don't randomly go to a place and do a remote thing unless you have a team. So we had a team, and I was working with the team in Beijing. So the difference is actually, one is, yeah, thanks to the diversity that happens in the US, right? Especially in the tech companies in West Coast, you're already exposed to everybody from Russia to Romania, right? Because that's how it was in Microsoft. You can walk in a corridor, you can hear so many different languages. You're already exposed to culture at a miniature level, right? That's what I would call. So you just touch it, but you don't feel or sample it, right? So people on the call, when they're talking from Beijing in the meetings, yeah, they're going to be reserved. They get you what you want, and you give them what they ask for. But there is this invisible line which you can't explain. So when I went there, and this was like, you are supposed to manage a team, train them, and everything. It's like a 4 to 6 months, but I was all like, my the American work style of, okay, this is the thing, it's all professional, let's get this done. This is task one, task two, task three, boom, boom, let's go, right? And it completely backfired. Like it took me 4 weeks to undo what I did in the first week, because in China that's not how it works. I mean, they call it something called guanxi, which is guanxi, as they say it, which is like you invest enough before you can withdraw, right? Which is, we meet a team, I need to know Krish as a person, Krish's colleagues as a team. We go out for coffee, maybe beers, get to know, have that relationship set up, then we can start extracting. So it's not like, okay, I've flown in, there is no fire jumping there, I've come in here, I'm going to rescue you, do it. That doesn't work, right? And that I wouldn't have sensed. I'm talking from a professional perspective, right? Wouldn't have sensed being on a Google Meet or a Microsoft call, right? So that you have to be on the ground. And then comes the part about, okay, how do people do after hours there? How do people engage with each other? How do they spend time during lunchtime? There's a lot of relationship building that you cannot accomplish over a virtual call, right? That's why I think it makes a big difference, and that's the professional part. And then what Beijing as a city had to offer, how things work there and everything, you can't feel it until you land there, right? Let me give an example. People talk so much about, most of my Microsoft colleagues have a team in India, and they don't know, they can't understand, even comprehend how digital India is right now. When they land, they're going to see how everybody's flashing their Paytm or QR codes. I mean, you get even this 10-cent banana on the street using a QR code. You can't. I mean, the last person who I met here, they were blown away, saying, I didn't know India's gone this forward until I experienced it on the ground, right? So, yeah, to answer your question, you can gauge something from working with the team remotely, but when you're on the ground amongst them, working with them, it's an entirely different experience.
The word you said, can you say that again? The Chinese word? Was it, how do you say that, Prasanna?
Guanxi, the Guanxi. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Right. I think I've heard that before. I'm going to have a conversation with Deva tomorrow about B2B sales. And I read something recently about B2B sales. I'm like 6 weeks or 8 weeks old into B2B sales for whatever we are doing at Snowpal. And I realized that, I was reading that things are changing so much in that space that you're going to have to build these long-term relationships from a
Yeah.
marketing standpoint before you can actually, make the sale you intend to make.
Yeah.
Quite different from what you mentioned there, but it's similar along those lines, right? Because you went there for a technical reason, purpose, but it's not like giving orders, like saying, hey, do X, Y, and Z
Yeah.
and get something done. You need to understand the people. So that's a cultural learning, correct? That's a cultural learning that doesn't come through a camera that's sitting in front of the machine.
Impossible, because in front of a machine they're still going to do it, but you are not able to crack why is it not happening the way you want it, and why is it not happening in the speed you want it, right? Then you go understand, get the relationship, and then when you operate the right way, wow, things are moving so fast, right? Because now you know how it's like a prompt engineering in chat gpt, right? How do you ask the question is very important, right? So yeah, that you can't now probably there are enough YouTube videos, but this is back in 2008, right? So that made a big difference. And again, this was like a short-term project, right? 3 to 4 months is more than enough to understand any culture, in my opinion.
Okay, now let me go dig deeper into that. So, okay, I've had few conversations with guests who are in the space of remote work, who specialize in remote work. So, at some point, I want to bring, my initial phase of podcasting is having these individual guests, and then as I'm learning more, I want to actually bring more than one person and try to get different points of view, because we've talked about remote work in a few podcasts and how we've solved most of the problems, but now you bring up a new problem which we have nowhere close to solving in the world of remote work, for instance. So I'm going to
Mhm.
table that for a conversation. I'm going to come back to you with probably somebody else in a call
Yeah.
and we can chat a bit more about that. But let's say you mentioned Beijing, you mentioned 4 months, right? The thing about, I try to prepare for 10 minutes. Next time I shouldn't even do that because I have more to the diagram. But I've realized that some of us are very teleprompter friendly and we are good at that, and not all of us are. I'm terrible at that. Now
Yeah.
I don't even want to go back to my diagram because I have a lot more questions about based on what you just said. So what I came prepared with 10 minutes ago doesn't make much sense,
Yeah.
right? So 4 months in Beijing. I want to say China's, if I'm not wrong, is probably the third largest country in the world, right? The third or the fourth largest country in the world. They're very similar in square miles to the US. It's only
Mhm.
marginally different. So I want to say it's somewhere 3 million square miles or something. I mean,
Mhm.
give or take is my
Mhm.
understanding. So I think Canada, US, and China should be not too different in terms of their size.
Mhm.
You mentioned 4 months, and were you there in one city, Prasanna, or were you there in multiple cities in China?
Yeah, I was there. It was supposed to be for 4 months. I extended to 6 months. It was all in one city, Beijing. But I traveled. I used that opportunity to travel around China. But I went back for a longer stint in Shanghai for a year and a half. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
it was like totally 2 years in China. Yeah,
2 years. Okay. That changes my question, but I'm still going to ask my question. So,
yeah, go
okay,
ahead.
it's 2 years in China. What percentage of China do you think you'd have been able to cover in the time that you were there collectively?
I can't put a number. I can't quantify, but I think a good percentage. I think travel to at least more than a dozen cities across different parts.
So, are we
But I
talking
can
like 25%? Are we talking 50%? Are we talking 10%?
e- easily 30% at least. Yeah, 30%
Okay, that's
significant.
that's a lot. That's a lot,
Yeah.
right? So that's a big number. That's a really big number. A lot of it, for people like us, we'll never able to we get anywhere close to that number. But even with that number being big, that being said, it still isn't one third of the size of the country, right?
Yeah.
And as you know, I love Chinese food. My wife is from Malaysia. She
Okay.
has, she grew up with a lot of Chinese friends back in Malaysia. So we're vegetarian, but she cooks a lot of food that has like a. It's not Indian Chinese.
Okay.
Again, for folks who are watching this, Indian Chinese is a very popular cuisine.
Yeah.
You probably, if you're in the US, a lot of the audience is, but I'm hopefully expanding into the rest of the world as well. It's a very, very popular cuisine. And there was an article recently on New York Times talking about how Indian Chinese has become super popular. But I'm going to share like a joke, if you will. When my wife, Meena, when she came, she's only been to India, been once or twice before we got married. And I haven't been there a whole lot since, so she's not been there that much. But when I took her to an Indian Chinese place, it's called Mainland China. I don't know if they're still around, one of those really
Yeah.
nice Indian Chinese restaurants. And the food was brilliant. We came out of the restaurant. I asked like, hey, Meena, did you like the food? She's like, yeah, the food was great. But she's like, Chris, if you don't mind, I have a question. I'm like, yeah. I mean, I'm not a culinary expert by any stretch of the imagination. But just because I know more about India than she does, having grown up there, it's almost like she's like, okay, can you answer this question? Because she didn't have anyone else to ask the question too. She's like, this food was great. But what I'm not sure is, you said it's Indian Chinese. What is Chinese about this food? And I looked at her because I grew up thinking, this is it. I never been to China. I thought eating Indian Chinese food, this is how Chinese food would have been in China. And then I realized after coming here and eating a Chinese food, even, American Chinese, for instance, you realize, well, Indian Chinese, at least I could be wrong here, probably has very little to do with the Chinese cuisine because I eat Chinese food here all the time and I don't draw any similarities, right? So this is like a random anecdote, but I just, as somebody who's traveled there, uh, if we talked about food, like a complete digression. Do you agree with that sentiment? With that sentiment that my wife had about Indian Chinese, what are your thoughts on that cuisine?
Absolutely right. This goes back, everything ties back to the education, which is said in the beginning. You don't learn until you're on the ground. Don't believe anything. It's like, what you read or what you see in the articles, right? Go down on the ground, taste it, right? Yeah, the first experience for us in China was because we had the American Chinese, we had Indian Chinese. We're expecting certain kind of food, and Chinese food in China, the authentic one, is quite different, right? And anybody who visited us in Beijing and Shanghai was shocked by the thing, hey, this is not Chinese food. Right? They were refusing to accept the original one, right? It is quite different. And with that being said, that's when you won't know until you eat in China, right? A lot of misconceptions. People always ask me, oh, do they eat horse? Do they eat all kinds of meat? Do they eat scorpions? They do eat some kind of, offbeat meat, but that's not it. I mean, the majority of the food you get here, it's pretty tasty, and they're very vegetarian friendly, which a lot of people don't know. If you travel across China and different cuisines, right, they're very vegetarian friendly. Just to close out on that thing, like, so the history to the Indian Chinese is not just it was is completely made up. It was from the migrants who came from China into the northeast part of India, which is like
Mm,
Kolkata and all the northeast states, right? They settled down a few hundred years back, and that cuisine got kind of transformed and merged into the Indian version. So that is the history. It's exactly, you can tell your wife, the Malaysian and Singaporean Chinese is really not Chinese. Actually, they got from the migrants who came from Hainan and all the southern parts of China, and mainly Cantonese who migrated in, and they took the culture of the Malays and Indians and they made a version of that. You're absolutely right. None of them are original Chinese, but that's something you learn only when you
So what you're
go.
saying is, Prasanna, let me make sure I heard you right. I've been to Singapore, and so you're saying that the Chinese food in Singapore and Malaysia is also quite detached from the Chinese food in China?
It's more closer to the Chinese food than the Indian and American, but they also were brought by the migrants who came from the Cantonese migrants. And a lot of, I mean, go talk to any Singaporean or Malaysian about the chicken rice, which they're very proud of, right? And talk to a Chinese about their chicken rice from Sanya, there'll be like a good argument you engage there.
Is that the one
So
that's called nasi lama? Is that the
no,
one? Is
no,
it?
nasi lemak is more Malaysian. So
Oh,
there
okay,
are things
okay.
like laksa, nasi lemak. The Malaysian food is very authentic, right? I'm talking about the Chinese
Oh,
food that you
okay.
get in both the states. But again, unless you travel, you wouldn't know what the original thing is, right? That's when you
So
learn.
just to add to what you were saying earlier, right? So sitting in Seattle in front of this camera and working with folks who located in Beijing, you don't understand the part where you have to socialize, understand before you start, being productive. The second part is, even if we ate all the Chinese food in Seattle, I'm pretty sure it's great. I mean, I live on the East Coast,
Yeah,
in DC, but it's probably going to be quite detached, right? So there is the disconnect that you have, right? You're working with a group of people, and
yeah,
you don't quite understand each other as much as you possibly could. So travel opens up those types of things, right? So there's
exactly,
undeniably so. Now let's
exactly.
get to so I don't think if you ask anybody whether you want to learn from travel or not, I don't think I'd be surprised if someone said no, you're actually going to learn lesser. Now the next question is, again, these are random, but they'll collectively hopefully mean something. That's my hope. Is, can we, for people who are watching this thing, okay, Prasanna, you're sitting in a place of privilege. You're going to have a lot of money. You're going to be really wealthy. You're going to be really smart. Only then can you achieve this, right? Is that, even if we didn't take you as an example,
No,
is that like a true statement?
no, not exactly. So I'll go back to this education, everything. I'm giving you real world examples. When I worked in Thailand, and now it's becoming a big trend in subcontinent, right? Majority of the Ivy League people were getting out of and doing MBAs and everything. A lot of them are preferring to do the internship, not back in the States, but actually come into a emerging market, get their hands dirty, because if that's where the next billion users are, if that's where the next growth is going to happen, you're not going to learn much sitting in New York, right? Because you got to be on the ground, sitting in Singapore. So I wouldn't say it's just, there are a lot of exchange programs, a lot of internship, a lot of cross market stuff. I would highly recommend everybody who's sitting in the States or Europe and anywhere, right, to come and use an opportunity, because every company has an opportunity for you to. That's it's not coming from a place of privilege. I was lucky enough to work for a company that had international offices. So there's always a chance of, hey, why not give a shot at this particular role in Denmark, probably, right? So yeah, a lot of actually graduates today, and even people are coming out of big universities, are preferring to go and learn on the ground through internships and things like that. So I wouldn't say it is just because of if somebody's blessed enough to do this. It's just taking a shot, right? Why don't you go and do your internship in some other place? Nobody's going to say no to somebody coming from the States, right? So that's what I would recommend.
But was that let's say I had more math questions there actually, right? So some of the other simple math questions uh, is it I you are there like 195 countries, or is it like 200 and more? Like, is, I mean, I'm not getting into the delicacy, I mean, delicate questions there, but roughly 200 countries, give or take, right? Let's say, let's put it there, 200
Yeah.
countries. And uh, would it be, would it be the last 2 decades, Prasanna, given that we went to college about the same time?
Mhm.
Can we say that you visited or had the opportunity to go to these in the last 20 years, give or take?
Yes, last 20 years. And that is also because I'll tell you two things. One is, like I said, I used to come back home during the holidays to meet folks in India. So every time we had to travel during December, which was again tech industry, nobody's going to deny this, right? Things shut down in December, right? Anytime before Christmas to New Year, so you have that time window. We always used to come to India, and we maximized every time we came to India, we had to fly through either Europe or we fly through Asia. So it was all stopping over, doing these short trips. Yeah, not Chris. We didn't have the privilege of doing these extended trips like you mentioned. It was all sampling these different places, and then, like I said, we've worked in so many different countries. And working in China for a couple of years meant finish off all the things we wanted to see in that area. Yeah, so 2 decades is what it took.
Okay,
Yeah, with
right.
work.
And so it's about 10 countries a year. And I know it's not like it doesn't happen. I'm pretty sure it's not a linear fashion, right? There's going to be a different style, but I'm going to normalize it just for conversational purposes. So you mentioned 800 cities and 20 years. That's about 40 cities a year.
Yeah.
That's about three and a half to four cities a month, right? That's a city every week, right? That's a city every week. So this it's again, these numbers are, you have to digest this. Almost like, when you look at the data and the LLM models and what kind of data they're dealing with. To me, I'm looking at numbers like at that level, because
Okay.
it has to be humanly possible to achieve these, for instance. So my first question there is, was this a carefully crafted plan of life, saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to live my life exactly this way, or did it organically happen and you went from there?
Not at all. It was excuse me, the first 10 years was very, like I said, I was a stereotypical techie working in the West Coast. How do I get my next promotion? How do I buy this car, mortgage? Yeah, let me run through the whole list of things we got to do, right? So the first 10 years was not at all planned, I think. And again, living in the US, you would know there are not many holidays. Like, which another thing I learned, Europe and Asia, people enjoy a lot of holidays, right? America
Yeah.
has like five, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the first one starts. Yeah, sorry, Christmas is over, guys. So first one is, May end is when the first thing starts. So there are like 3 or 4 long weekends, right? And that's what we could travel during. And these were like short trips. So the first 10 years were all about very minimalistic travels. We were seeing probably 5 or 6 countries on an average every year. And then somewhere post China, and then came back, and it started evolving into different places when the speed picked up. Like yeah, Asia, people celebrate all kinds of holidays. There are so many public holidays and so many vacations you have, right? That's when, so it is not all even. The first 10 years it was not planned. It was just like, hey, that is a long weekend, where do we go? Let's go to the Caribbean, right? Then somewhere down the last 7 or 8 years, it became like a mission. Hey, like there are so many countries left, let's go through all the countries. So it became like a like an obsession almost, right? But again, it's not even like why I brought that up. I keep stressing that we did it with a job is, I'll throw humility out of the door now. So last year, 2023 was phenomenal because I took a break from work. I wanted to publish the book and everything. I decided, okay, let me not work for anybody. Let me see how it feels to just keep traveling. And I'm going to quote the number here just so you like it. So it was actually 58 countries, right? And 112 cities is what I managed to travel through. And it
In
was like
one year?
one year, last year, 2023, 178 hotel rooms, right? I didn't stay in the
No, wait,
same
hang
hotel
on,
room.
hang on. Let's
Yeah.
let's digest the number. You
Yeah.
said 58 countries.
58 countries and 120 some cities. I'll tell you the number later. And the most important thing is 170 plus hotel rooms, which is like every other day I change a room, right? And which means, yeah, if you really want to do all the countries, you can do it in 2 years, right? If you have the money and you have nothing to do, right? Because you can just keep exploring the world. And but what we did was unplanned. It was like, let's take it as it comes for most of the life.
I'm just digesting the number. I'm just
Yeah,
digesting
58
the
countries.
number.
Yes, and
And the
58
way I'm
countries. We just took a break. Yeah.
and the only way I can digest the number is by divvying up the number and making some sense to myself, right? So that's about 60 countries. That's 5 countries a month. That's more than one country every week. And you
Yeah.
said, do you have the cities also? The number of cities?
Yeah, it's 113 or something. And these are all unique countries, which means I kept going back to Germany, for example, to connect. So I'm not talking about the repeat. These are unique countries. And yeah, some 113 or
So those
114.
were countries you had never been to before.
Oh, no, no. I've been to all the countries. So,
Okay.
so these are
When
countries
you
that,
say unique, you mean they're it's not going back to Germany three times and counting it towards
no,
58, but
yeah,
it's
no,
58
not at
different
all. Yeah.
countries.
For example, I went to Germany in Feb. now went again in October. I'm not counting them as twice. Yeah.
Wow. So let me
Yeah.
let okay. Let me ask this. Now somebody's watching it, right? They'll be like, "This is great. You're like a Bezos or Zuckerberg type of person. You got everything available, right?" Uh, maybe, maybe not, right? Now let's say, let me. I don't know, but I'm just going to ask this question. Nothing comes without sacrifices, right? I can give you an example. Running a startup, I know a lot of people do it, but I've not done it a lot of times. I started running this a few years ago. I've had to make a lot of sacrifices, right? And early days it felt like a sacrifice. I mean, it's not for profit, it's for profit. When I say sacrifice, personal lifestyle changes and whatnot, right? And then you fall in love with what you're doing, your thought process changes, your
Mhm.
behavior changes. I'm not going to birthday parties and anniversaries. I'm not missing them anymore. I don't know. Hopefully, I'm not antisocial. Maybe this podcasting is bridging that gap. I'm able to connect with people, but I've had to make those sacrifices, just like everybody else, right? Everybody makes sacrifices. I want to ask you a simple question and a not so simple question.
Mhm.
The first leading question is: have you made any sacrifices, or have you not had to make any sacrifices in achieving these things?
Yeah, these are definitely sacrifices, right? Because one main sacrifice is not having that permanent place, what you call home. It's getting exhausting, right? Right now, I can feel it already. 2023 was, I really need a home. I really need my own bed, my own kitchen where I can cook my food. So that is really a huge sacrifice. It's taking a hit on the mental health as well as the physical health, right? So that is the biggest sacrifice. And apart from that, yeah, the sacrifices are the comfort, right? Because the question, yeah, we've worked and saved for 20 years. Now the sacrifice is I could be continuing to do this and wake up on a Monday morning not wanting to go into work, or actually wake up with a map saying where am I going to go next, right? But the sacrifice there is the financial sacrifices you're making, right? Because you are consciously saying, I'm happy with this much money, I'm not going to chase more, right? So those two are the biggest sacrifices. One is the stability, like as I spoke about, your home and your bed and your kitchen. And the second thing is the financial sacrifice. Yeah, definitely both are out there.
Okay, so now you make those, right? You all of us make our choices, make those sacrifices. Now, a completely parallel question is: let's say I go, let's say Diwali, right? Diwali was like 2 months ago, right? Let's say you go to a store. I buy some sweets. It's not as great here, unfortunately, in the US as it would be in India, for instance. Currently, by the way, Prasna, do you live in India right now?
No, we are kind of nomads. We have no home right now.
Oh
Right
no,
now,
what I mean is
based,
like right now,
yeah,
are you
yeah,
dialing in
based on,
from
yeah,
like an?
I am
Okay,
in a
cool.
hotel room in India. Yes, yes.
Okay, but if I may ask, which city in India?
Bangalore, Bangalore.
Oh, in Bangalore. Okay, perfect. The Bangalore, for folks, you probably know it's like a couple hundred kilometers from like Chennai. So, uh, you are, let's say you're working. You mentioned some of the sacrifices you've had to make, but the example I was taking was, say Diwali time or during Christmas. Folks, you buy food, cakes, and dessert and whatnot. I just take Diwali because my favorite, festival. You go there, you go to a store, you buy like some of the Indian sweets, for instance, right? Now, some of the stores have like a 500 items, right? Now, you take a bite of one of them. It's great after dessert. You take one. Let's ignore the sugar and the other dietary aspects of it because it's going to skew my question. Let's pretend that it has no sugar and it's perfectly healthy, right? It's a big wrong assumption, but let's just make it for the purpose of my question. You take the first bite, you enjoy it. You're like, hey, I want to try this other sweet. I want to try the laddu. I'm going to take the laddu. I'm going to take a bite. I enjoy it. It's pretty good. Now, I try the third sweet somebody puts on my plate. Maybe it's good, but now my taste gets smudged, right? It's camouflage, meaning I can barely tell the difference between the badisha and the laddu and the
Mhm.
and the barfi because they look different. They have a different color. They have a different shape. They have different whatever nutritional facts, etc. But they all are in the space of dessert. Where I'm going with this question is, after the third sweet, I can hardly even tell if the fourth one is good, bad, or ugly because I'm actually my tongue. I can't tell the difference because I need to wait a day or 2 or 3 days before I can appreciate that next sweet. If I took this to travel, you traveled to 58 countries last year, right?
Mhm.
Let's take the year before that, 2021, for instance. Let's say you did 22, for instance.
Mhm.
Uh, you probably, being presumptuous, I presume you did far fewer travel in terms of the number of countries a year before, right?
Yes, yes.
So, you know where I'm going with this question. I want to still finish the question, which is, were you able to appreciate the countries and the travel last year compared to, say, the year before?
Very, very, very good question, right? So this is a constant conflict that's going on within my head, my wife's head too, right? Which is like, is it getting smudged into one other? I mean, like sometimes, oh, was it this year we went French Guyana? Oh, that seemed like last year, right? Because you're constantly making new memories. Like treat of this like a RAM, right? You're putting more into your thing, and something gets flushed out. Oh, it's out of your RAM, right? And so I need to go back and look at the photo album to recollect, oh, what happened in February, because it's already flushed out of my immediate memory, right? So definitely that's a valid thing. And again, this was not planned. It came off. We are without a job, we are on a break, let's see how far we can go. What started off as then it became like a goal on, let's see how much we can, because we never ever been going to be able to do this, we'll get back to our job. So that's the reason. But I want to respond to your question in a different way. A vacation is beautiful, right? When you have a job, right? Because we used to look forward to that memorable day, right? Or the Thanksgiving day, because come November you get very excited. End of the month we're going to be in the Caribbean or Mexico. But now I'm opening my itinerary or whatever. Yeah, you're going to be in Mexico next month. You're going to be in Bali the next. The excitement is not the same as what it used to be, because you're building up, you're waiting for it, right? You're absolutely right. It's number one. It's getting forgotten too soon. You're not appreciating it as much, and even before it, the build up is not the same, right? The best analogy I can think of, every day is a Friday, right? You're not
Right.
going to look forward to the TGIF, right? You're going to say it's Friday morning, let's be happy. But if you're on a break for 1 year, then yeah, I don't know what's a Tuesday, what's a Friday, right? It's a good question, and I do. The response is yes. You're not appreciating it as much as you would have if you spaced it out evenly.
Okay, brilliant, right? And another question, not easy enough, but I'm going to ask that question as well. Let's say, let's say you're done 100 countries, right?
Mhm.
At that point, you feel like, well, I understand this world a lot more than 99.99999%. We do the math, even if you did 100 countries, I don't know how many people have been there. Um, so if we went back halfway through your travel journeys, 100 countries, was there a point of time ever you asked yourself, you know what, I think I have a sense of the world. I've been to the East, the West, North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Antarctica. I've covered the continents, Australia. I've been to a lot of these countries. There's not a necessity, quote unquote. There's no such thing as necessity in this case, but I'm just using the word loosely. There is not so much a necessity to complete the loop here, but I feel like I've begun a journey and it'll feel half complete and unfinished if I did not do it. So I have to do it in the interest of feeling complete versus the actual urge to visiting the remaining 100 countries. First of all, does the question even make sense? If it does, what do you have to say for that?
No, actually, good point. That's why I didn't want to put the percentage number when you asked about China, right? Because like Australia, when you say what percentage, yeah, if you do the coast like Canada, if you do the perimeter, right, you practically done most of the. It's like the Pareto principle, right? 20/80. You don't have to do all the stuff to get a good feel. Do the perimeter, you're done Canada kind of stuff, right? So I would apply the same thing to the whole world. Yeah, you don't have to do entire Southeast Asia to feel. But again, every country is unique, but you can at a certain point, 70 to 80 countries, I can happily say you would have sampled the whole world and can speak happily. But the corollary to that is where a lot of people, especially in the tech industry, even the business, make a mistake, right? They used to say, I don't know, you're old enough to understand, right? There were markets, there were EMEA markets. Now you can't say EMEA, it's North Africa and something else. Now they say MIC, and they used to say Southeast Asia, APAC. Now they're dismantling APAC. It's like, it's big BS, if I may use that word. Yeah, it's like there's nothing called APAC, right? Now they're saying Southeast Asian market. I lived in Southeast Asia for 4 years. Sorry, every country in Southeast Asia is very different. You can't launch what
Right.
you launched in Malaysia and take it to Philippines. No way, no way, right? But
Right.
but for somebody sitting in New York or somebody sitting in Seattle, they're going to think, hey, now we're going to expand to. That's what Uber did and struggled, right? You can't just walk in. So it depends. So in a place like Southeast Asia, you might want to see a lot more countries, but in a place like West Africa, yeah, you see two of the probably 15 to 20, you've done a good sample. So the response to your question is, yeah, I think you can do somewhere not even half, much lesser than that, and get a good feeling of, yeah, I know how the planet operates, right? Definitely.
You know, beautiful, right? And you said it beautifully because, it's very easy to draw, say things are monolithic, but we know it's not because one of my projects, I've worked with folks in South America from like four different countries, even though some of the languages were common, right? I mean, Brazil has Portuguese, but the rest of South America predominantly, I think it's Spanish. But
Mm.
even between Spanish speaking nations, cultures are very different. And even
Yeah,
though the magnitude of the difference you only appreciate it if the more less ignorant you are. And I say
mm,
this because if you take India as an example, right, uh, unless you've been there, how do you explain India to people who have not
mm,
been to India? I've tried to
yeah,
do this and you cannot do justice because say you take the car from Chennai in Tamil Nadu and drive like 200 kilometers, like 5 hour drive give or take, to Bangalore in Karnataka, a different state altogether. They are the southern part of India, right? So maybe there are some commonalities in food, possibly. In the last call with Deva, I asked him, I'm going to ask you the same question. Actually, let me pause my thought there. I want to start the conversation with that, but given your travels, I couldn't start there. What is your, if you had to pick with all your travels, Prasanna, what is your favorite food item and why? One,
that
just
is
one. You got to pick one.
I cannot pick. I mean, it's impossible. If it's my last meal kind of a thing, yeah, my last meal will have like 15 items. I want to be spread out like a thali, right? I can't think. It's hard. It keeps changing,
Let me
right?
narrow it down. You wake up in the morning. I wake you up in the middle of the night or early in the morning. The first dish that pops up in your mind for breakfast.
I would say masala dosa, right?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now, again, for folks who've not used it, it's a crepe. If you've gone to South Indian restaurants, you're gonna find it. Deva said idli, and you said dosa. This is kind of funny in a way because they just go together. That was the last podcast I had, by the way, right, with Deva Rangaraj. So you've been to all these countries. You've done phenomenal amount of travel. I asked you a question about what your first dish is going to be, right? If I had asked this question, say 20 years ago, right? The exact same question, would your answer have been different, or is it likely it might have been very similar?
It would be the same, no difference. And that's why chapter 17, I'm not pitching my book here, chapter 17 of that book talks about incredible India, right? It is unbelievable. I think the influence and impact it could have on you, it's lifelong. Yeah. So not 20 years. Ever since I grew up, if we say what's your favorite dish in the morning, yes, it'll be the same. Yeah.
Which means, can I then sort of extrapolate this, take the liberty to extrapolate it, even though it cannot be done, that the core tenets of us as people, I mean, does it fundamentally, I know you have learnings when you travel to places, even working with people. The beauty of the world is the diversity, the languages, the religions, the culture, the food, everything about it. But does it still ultimately, fast forward years and decades, are there aspects and facets of you, Prasanna, that you think have stayed intact, and some that have changed quite some, and some that have changed dramatically? Like, if you could speak to
Okay.
some of these things.
I'll give a long-winded answer to that if you don't mind. So like I said, the evolution. You got to connect the dots here, and I said you evolve as a person. Let's treat like a fabric, right? You start with the small thread, and by the time, if you're lucky enough to have lived and traveled, and let's assume you keep building your fabric, right? And you are a bigger canvas. So in my opinion, yeah, it growing up, right? It was probably the South Indian meals which came as my comfort food. Then you start traveling and you pick up new dishes. You pick up new food. Like when I go to the US and I picked up, the classic burger, the way you can eat it. Now that's in my like what do you say, list of things to eat, right? So you keep expanding, right? But to answer your previous question, it's not easy. Like here's my opinion. I'm expressing it freely. That people, even in a professional career, I don't know if you've taken the Myers-Briggs test or any of the personality tests, right? I'm not a big fan of those kind of personality things, or rating people on something, right? You are not you're not something permanently, right? You could be a introvert at home, but you could be an extrovert at work, right? So you could be probably a 4.0 as a developer, right? But you could be a 2.0 as a product manager. So rating somebody or actually framing somebody in something, it's very very subjective, right? Because people keep changing. So to go back to your question, when you say favorite food, why I want to answer is you as a human are very different in different phases or stages of your life, right? If you ask me, or you had a big night, you're super hungover, what's the food you like to eat? That will be a very different dish, right? And if you said you are you like you feel tired, you like like the rasam, I don't know how many people would know. When you're not having a cold, when you're not feeling well, if it's cold weather outside, it'll be a different dish. If it's raining, it's a perfect weather. You know what I'm going to say next, right? So I would like to put that into the context of what I said previously. What you like,
Wait, hang on.
and
Let me guess.
yeah.
Raining. I was gonna guess budgie. I don't know. Are you gonna say
Yes,
budgie or
bhaji,
some?
yeah. I mean, the North
Okay.
Indians could say pakoda, bhaji, right? It's a chai pakoda or bhaji and something, right? So, like, why I'm bringing that up is very important because if you are enclosed yourself to just one place, if you lived, grown up, and everything in Chennai and worked in the same place, then your repertoire is going to be the same, and then probably the answer to the question is going to remain the same. But if you lived in 5 different countries and traveled enough, then why not? I mean, if like the dish would change, right? So for me, my favorite post drinking food late night snack is always a shawarma, right? Or it'll be always a pulled pork sandwich. Which, if you asked me 20 years back, I would have asked what it was, right? So that's what I'm trying to say. Like you keep adding more and more into your what do you say, composition, and that changes you as a person, right?
So your
But
your your food palette increases, right? Absolutely. But
increases. But what doesn't change, sorry, just to close that question, what doesn't change is what we call as comfort food, right? Comfort is comfort, right? People say, when we played this game on What You'll Ask Me, a lot of people I know, and my friends, they pick their mom's specific dish, right? Despite having lived in the planet for such a long time, because that's what comforts them, right? Like, since you asked me, wake up in the morning, sometimes I feel like, yeah, that's my day is good if I eat that, because that's what I've been eating for so many years.
this, so which means, so you get exposed to a lot of different kinds of food, right? We talked about it, and you depending on the time of the day, the mood you're in, you're gonna make those adjustments. But the core, if, the let's say we have a tiny circle, you eat certain kinds of food,
Mhm.
and then you travel, the circle keeps increasing in size. Even after 20 years of travel, after traveling to all the countries, does that circle, is it what do I say, linear, has it linearly increased in radius, or or has it kind of stagnated, meaning you've been to a lot of places, while if you added something from every country and every cuisine you're exposed to, that's going to be a circle with whatever the radius, the diameter is going to be. Is it that much, or is it at some point it's a circle that's bigger than a lot of our circles, but it's tiny in the context of what it could have possibly been?
I don't know how to answer that question. So that circle is expanding constantly, right? It's only growing, right? Just to give a perspective, I'm traveling to Gujarat. It's a state in India, for those who don't know. And I've been there twice already, right? And I was looking up what to eat in this particular city. Trust me, there are like 50 items I've never ever heard of in my life. And I've been to 27 of the 28 states in India, which is, I'm exposed, I'm traveled. But still, that's a fascination, right? I'm like already getting excited like a kid. Oh, I'm going to try all these new dishes. And the same, I think you can, like you said about China, you can keep traveling to new regions and you're going to discover something that you never heard of, right? So that circle is only going to keep expanding more and more. That alone, I don't think it will ever saturate for me, at least in my lifetime. Yeah.
you know uh, we only scratch the surface,
Mm.
because there are so many questions, out of curiosity, out of interest, out of travels. And it's not just me, right? It's not
Mhm.
just me. Every time, after I bought the send me the book, and talked about it, it's like synonymous, right? Even though we may not have grown up together in the same neighborhoods or the schools, when you talk travel, I mean, there's only two or three names that pop up in my head. There's only one person I know personally. The other person, like Drew Binsky. I don't know if you know Drew Binsky on YouTube. He's another one of those travelers who makes this video content, and
Yeah.
he's been to, I think he's closing in on like most of the countries. He's a really nice guy. I don't know where he lives, probably in the southern part of the US. There's only two people, and I don't know Drew Binsky by, by person, right? I mean, I just know him on YouTube as somebody who follows the channel. Uh, but this is, I can't express it because I have a lot of respect for art as a person. And to me, what you're doing is art, right? It's a different
Thank
form of
you.
art, right? It's not music, it's not drawing. You have other skills. I know, I vaguely recall you having heard you play the guitar. If I recall, you play the
Yeah.
guitar, right? Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, but it's still it's an art. How you express it is different. Everyone expresses themselves differently. I'm nowhere near my first set of understanding questions. So, but we did touch upon the business aspects of it, if you will, right? You did mention that going to China is different from sitting in Seattle and thinking you know China, because, or you mentioned, sorry, Southeast Asia, other parts of Southeast Asia, that you couldn't say that Vietnam is similar to Cambodia, is similar to, say,
Mm.
Philippines, is similar to Indonesia, to Malaysia, to Singapore, to Brunei and other countries, right? But when you're sitting here 10,000 miles away, and if you've not done the travel and don't have that exposure, it's you're likely going to believe that those countries have nothing different between themselves, even though they are dramatically different.
Yeah.
So as we Sorry, go ahead, Preston.
No, no, I want to give some product examples, right? Just not just to focus only on travel. I'll give a example. Back in the day when I was working for the Maps team, like we were thinking the you, if you don't understand if you don't go to some place, if you don't live there, you don't understand the market, it's very hard to even build the products, right? So for example, yeah, and Google bought Keyhole at the time, which was, for those who don't know, they were the mapping company, and Google bought, they were getting into maps too. So we were very focused on building products with a mindset of very West Coast, if I may say, because we were thinking of the user stories were like, driving directions, for example. Or Steve jumps into the car and, types in his address and everything, blah, 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 right? Whereas in East Coast, like East Coast, a lot of the public transit, there is metro, there are buses, right, which we didn't even think of. And while we are even trying to implement this, Google just implemented public transit driving directions, which was a huge differentiator, right? And we could see us bleeding traffic into Google Maps because people were all sitting in one small corner, not understanding the market. Same with Uber, right? I can give an example. They just waltzed into India without understanding India as a cash-rich market, and within a few months, they had to redo the product to quickly add cash as a delivery. It's funny. If some of this product folks had at least come to India for 2 weeks just to go around and see how much of cash was floating, this is back then, right? They
Right,
would have
yeah.
never dared to launch a product that was credit only, right? So there are tons of things like that. I can keep going on and on, where even now I'm discovering, being on the ground, how the people who are developing the product are so far away from the market where the product is being implemented. And the models that work on, I'm not, we can have a debate on this, Chris, about this remote working. The model is typically, let's have product managers on the ground who are like more feeding features into the team that's developing. That never works. Trust me, as a developer, I've some of my favorite developers have been one, hey, I came back from Tokyo, this particular thing that these apps have done, or we should kill these features here, right? Cannot teach people how a market, the heartbeat of a market is, unless you're on the ground.
You know
And
what, Prasanna, is a brilliant thing that you summarized here, because I want to have a teaser for the next, and I'm taking the liberty of assuming I didn't do a terrible job. I will save that to after the call. But I was just saving a teaser, but my teaser is nowhere near as the one that you just mentioned,
yeah,
because I'm going to save those last 30 seconds, right? In my mind, I'm going to go back and watch it again. If I can convince you to come back, uh, I want to start the conversation essentially there, because a lot of this, in the last, again, just to give you a little bit more context before we close this off, I've talked to people who are in product management, talked to
mhm,
folks who are in sales, talked to folks who are in engineering, like developers, just like myself, talked to folks who are in the space of remote work, and, sort of talking about remote cultures and how to improve remote teams, for instance. I've talked to, folks in different facets of engineering, like, from developers to management to senior management to whatnot, right? So a lot, and I'm pretty sure I'm forgetting other discussions we've also had. We've talked about automation. We've talked about a little bit about AI, the automated economy. I have another conversation towards the end of the week. but all of them come together. I'm trying to draw these patterns, design patterns, if you will. These are all
Mhm.
disparate conversations, right? If you take each of them independently, sure. If you wrote a book, you could write a book with the Venn diagram not having any element of overlap with the other discussions at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it will almost be manufactured if it did not have an overlap. It is more natural for it to have an overlap
Mhm.
than for it to not have an overlap. And
Yeah.
my hope here is, I'm spilling the beans on the podcast, but my hope here is to bring folks independently and then bring people together and say, hey, you know what? This is what Prasanna says about remote work and not remote work. What is someone else's opinion, right? To have a more productive conversation that kind of lends itself into that space of being technical, because that's what we do at Snowpal as a company.
Yeah.
But my interest is beyond just engineering, right? Everybody I'm talking to, like, even you're in this space, but our conversation, for the most part, has been around it till to the last summary that you mentioned there, as to
Mhm.
why it is important for people to learn cultures. I had another teaser, but I'm going to save that and just go with what you said here. Uh, Closing this conversation, um, I know a lot of this might, hopefully it didn't come across as cliched, because if somebody who's traveled, I don't know what questions anybody would, what someone else would have wanted to ask that person. But for me, this was it, right? And the context for me was, Prasanna, I grew up in India much like yourself, live in the US, done a little bit of travel in Europe and Southeast Asia, but it's so little. I want to talk about my lack of travels and why I do it or don't do it, uh, which has to literally goes down to coach and the seats on the plane, which we've not gotten to planes. And because in your book, you had mentioned, I don't want to go into it in this call, but I want to quickly say for folks who are watching, I know I read it said you had mentioned that you've actually been on every plane, not just the major airlines, but even the local airlines in different countries. Am I correct in stating that?
It's 427 different airlines. That's the count I'm having. So 427. Some of them are defunct now. Yeah, that's the count.
Wow. Okay, that's another number for us to pick up on. Let me ask you one more number.
Yeah.
That's the number of airlines. Do you also kind of have you tracked the actual planes themselves, the type of planes they were?
Not actually tracked. Now you gave me a new project. So now- but I think I've been in. I think I've been pretty much every major
Like,
plane
what is
type.
the
Pretty much.
smallest plane? You know what? I don't want to ask this question. I want to spoil. I have questions about the plane and the travel and everything, because that's very close to my heart. I did a silly, stupid podcast on business class flying as someone who's never been on a business class seat ever. It was like 5 minutes of me rambling about it. But, in closing this first conversation of many, I hope, uh, what would be your closing comments?
My closing comments is like I would like you say, right? I think like the education part which is said, and I would like to link it to if your community is people who are in the tech industry and everything. If you do this for the part two, I would definitely like to go a little bit more into the details of what I mentioned about what the learnings were. Right? Give some illustrations. You said you learned about culture. You said you learned about the gaps in products. Like I would love to talk about in the next call some examples, right? And that's how I would say the next thing. But I still say closing is yeah, please explore, right? Explore the world. It doesn't have to be traveling across the continent, doesn't have to be traveling across borders. If you're sitting in the US, there's so much you can do just getting out of your state, coming down south and see what happens there. Yeah, so yeah, start somewhere, start small, but explore, right? Because there is so much to learn just by seeing the world out there. That would be my closing statement. Yeah.
Thank you, Prasanna. Before I end this, folks, we have Prasanna Veeraswamy with us, who, if you're watching the ending before you go to the top of the podcast, this is somebody who's been to every single country in the world. The last 70 minutes of our conversation has been me poking around, asking curiosity questions to Prasanna. But Prasanna, in the subsequent conversations, feel free to ask me, as somebody who's not done those travels, to prod and find out what are the things that people like us are actually missing out on, right? Why? And you mentioned a lot of the reasons as well. This was amazing. I mean, for me personally, I've been waiting to have this conversation about travel, and for folks who know me and make fun of me all the time about how little travel I do, this is maybe trying to find inspiration in the best of places, and I don't know if I could find inspiration anywhere else. So thank you so much, Prasanna. Again, Prasanna Veeraswamy. Definitely, folks, check out Prasanna's book. I shared it at the top of the podcast. It's on Amazon. Definitely go check it out. One for the road. And with that, I think I'm going to say until next time. Thank you, Prasanna.
Thank you. See you soon.